rest in peace to Sir Robert Gillies. He is the last standing 28th of the 20th Māori Battalion, last man standing, and he has passed away recently. So rest in peace to Sir Robert Gillies. Your thoughts on this, Urs?
Yes, very important person, and because of the Māori Battalion, obviously. He was knighted when he was 97, I think. Like, he refused to be knighted. Wow. Yeah, which is really cool because, stood
on business.
Yo, and that's it. And his family, like, for years tried to get him to accept the knighthood, and he wouldn't. And you know how there's a lot of Māori, not just Māori, like indigenous people all over the Commonwealth who have refused to be knighted because it is for service to the king, to the monarch. It shows that you've done their work, and as indigenous people who have been colonized, genocided, murdered, land stolen all around, you can see why a lot of strong indigenous intellectuals say no. And there's been a lot who have said, no, we are not going to accept a knighthood. Now, of course, it's in the interest of the monarchy to have these people say, yes, we accept it, because it shows that, it puts them in a
ownership.
And it looks like we see doing things for us should be the goal. Serving the monarch should be your goal. Fuck your ancestors and all of that shit. And so it's really cool. He refused, and so his family, they tell the story how they kept trying, and then eventually, I think it was his grandson saying things like, "Look, you can accept a knighthood, and we can use it to honor and remember, the other members of the Māori Battalion, but also remember Māori, and the fight they've gone through." And man, after all those years, like, he finally accepted it, and it's he didn't sit on it though. Like, just last year, I think, or the last year and a half, he's been part of Waitangi Tribunal. What do you call it? Like a case, I guess, where he has said a lot of things against the crown, and he has said things like, and it was quoted on the news like last week, where he said Māori should have never served with the crown. All the crown did was take. There was no partnership. And he used the term mau tangata, waste of lives. And in Samoan we say mau or mai mau. Yeah. And he said this. So he's knighted, and he's Sir Robert Gillies, and he says this with his knighthood. And that's so powerful, man. Like, he knew it was all bullshit. And he spoke about how when they returned, from the war, to their land being confiscated, the treatment being poor. And, bro, this is a very strong man who was a warrior for Māori and the Māori Battalion right up until he died. What usually happens, you receive an accolade, or you receive the adulation of the crown and Prince Charles or Queen Elizabeth, and you start shutting up because you don't want to offend them, or you want to protect your knighthood. Nah, this guy wasn't about that, man. This guy spoke up for Māori and spoke up for the Māori Battalion right up until his death. So, dude was a real one.
And just to clarify too, because I know we've talked about this before, but there will be people that'll jump in the comment section and they'll be like, well, why did he fight in the first place? Māori people were fighting for something different, entirely different.
Absolutely.
They were fighting for their rights.
Yes, and that's how it has to be seen. They weren't fighting to help the crown. They were fighting for their own freedom. Māori figured, and we spoke about this when we talked about World War I, like, Māori were trying to get into the consciousness of the Pākehā here and trying to show them, look, like, we are worth equal treatment, like, treat us fairly. Māori knew that there's no one in Egypt who's fucking stealing land here in New Zealand.
Yep.
There's no one in Turkey who's confiscating land in New Zealand. They knew full well who the fucking enemy was. And they felt the only way to get to this person, to these Balangis here in New Zealand, these colonizers, the only way to get them to stop confiscating land and stop treating us like shit is maybe we help them out. maybe we do something to help them out, and they can see that we are worthy of equitable treatment.
And what happened when they came back?
And of course you can't. So in the First World War, Māori, like all the Pacific people who were involved in World War One, they were the pioneers. They weren't allowed a gun. All right, so they went to the war. They had to dig the trenches. We spoke about this. Dig the trenches, run the ammunition, run the supply lines, make the tents.
During war.
Our
so
people,
defenseless.
yes, our people were not allowed a gun because, like the Aotearoa Museum says, they did not want to teach Indigenous people how to kill whites. Even though it's German whites, even though it's other whites, you're still killing a white person. So they did not want Indigenous people to learn how to kill a white person, because when those Māori and Pacific people returned to New Zealand, they would have become accustomed to killing white people. And become a threat, know how to use guns, know how to protect their lands, know how to protect their people, know how to protect. So it was a policy not to give Māori, not to give Pacific people guns. And so, yeah, they ran defenseless. They were given spades in the gunfight. That was World War One. World War Two, man, it's dodgy too, bro. There is a Lieutenant General Bernard Freiberg of the 2nd Division Infantry, and he says no one fought more than the Māori battalion, and who had more casualties, right? No one fought more than them. Like, they were chucked in the most fights. And then New Zealand Herald published that they often were sent first. Have you seen South Park and Operation Human Shield, where they send the black people in the front line to take all the bullets and try to knock out those in the front, and then they send in the white people.
Yeah.
So this is Freiberg saying that the Māori fought the most battles, and this is New Zealand Herald saying that they were usually sent first. So they gave them guns, but they gave them guns to go first, to take the hits. And remember, their casualty rate was 50% higher than the rest of the New Zealand Army. So this was dodgy as well. Because remember, men are the protectors, they are the strength. If you knock them off, in New Zealand, their land is easier to confiscate. There's no men to defend it.
Yeah.
But again, Māori again were appealing to the consciousness of Bālangi. Please, look, we just want our equitable treatment. They knew that there's no Egyptian, like I just said, there's no one in Egypt, there's no German in New Zealand who's stealing their land. They know full well it's these fucking Bālangis in New Zealand. That's why they fought. They fought to try to get to those people and to stop them. And just, there's a lot to it, and that's what he brought up. And that's what he kept fighting for, is don't just remember the Māori battalion and be like, yeah, they served the king and the monarch.
Yeah.
And they didn't actually. They were fighting the consciousness of the monarch. They were fighting the consciousness of the white people in New Zealand. That's why they did it. That was their battle, was them. Because these Bālangis in New Zealand, confiscating their land. And not just this, there was something done by the Treasury. There was a guy who came out in the Treasury, I forgot his name, I'm sorry, but he was like in 1937, and this is the climate around that time, and he's explaining why the government gave Māori lower pensions, and he's saying because Māori have a lower standard of living, therefore they are entitled to a low pension, because a pension is not meant to elevate you in your class system and elevate you economically. If you are a low class people like Māori, you get a low pension. That's why we've given you a low pension. So that was the climate. If you look at what happened in Pukekohe, how they had the segregation there, they segregated the pools. So Māori weren't allowed in some of the pools. They weren't allowed in some of the barbers. Some barbers had a Māori chair because the Bālangi there, the Pākehā, didn't want to be seated in the same chair that Māori were in.
Yep.
Crazy. This is South Auckland too. So sometimes there will be more Māori in the barber, but they all had to wait for that one chair to be free. They weren't allowed to use the chairs for the Pākehā. This was the climate then. You're going off and fighting for your country, but your country hates your fucking guts. It's bullshit.
Yeah.
So that's what he kept saying, and that's why he said we should have never went and served with the Crown. You know, there was no partnership. We were treated like shit. We weren't allowed to be served at the pub. There was a policy not to rent houses out to Māori. So a lot of Māori had to pitch tents, and they had to use like the manure sheds. Like, this was New Zealand at the time. And remember, if you go search the N-word in the old newspapers and that, you'll see the N-word being used in New Zealand to describe Māori and Pacific people. That was the climate of the time. So
pretty casually too.
Just openly, just flippant. But it's really important that when you remember the Māori Battalion, like, and you remember Sir Robert Gillies, like, remember all of it. Like, it's not this celebration of serving the Crown. That's not what it is. Like, they went there to try fight the minds and the hearts of Pākehā in New Zealand. And has anything fucking changed?